I believe, and many have argued, that this government has done more on climate change than any other before. And frankly, not just in Canada, but in the span of 4 years, I challenge someone to show me a government that has done more in 4 years than this government has done.
We have chosen to focus not on taxes, but on technology, incentivizing and accelerating the development of technology, which Canada is a world leader in.
I think the important thing here is federal leadership. If somebody steps up and actually sets very concrete goals and then shows a plan of how to reach those goals, then it's going to be very easy to get provinces to buy into those targets. But as long as we're talking glittering generalities, then it's very, very hard to bring people around to what needs to be done.
It's week 3 of the federal election campaign, and this week the major parties are talking a lot about climate change and their plans to cut greenhouse gas emissions. So here at Power and Politics, we're zoning in on what each of those plans are. As you just heard, we've spoken with the Liberals, the NDP and the Conservatives about their green promises. Today, we're hearing from the Green Party. Joining me now is Ontario Green Party candidate Angela Keller-Herzog. Hi there. Nice to see you again. Hi. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
I appreciate it. So your plan sets out very aggressive targets, more aggressive than the targets that have been set by this government and the one before it. So by 2030, emissions should be reduced by 60% less than 2005. How will Canadians be able to hold you to account on those targets?
I think there have been proposals for an independent office. I think that that's an excellent idea, and I certainly support the idea as a management thing that if you don't measure it, then you don't manage it. And part of that is accountability, transparency, and integrity, right? Those go together. So if we were to set up an independent office on this most important issue, I think that's an excellent idea.
Do you think the target should be legislated? Do you think it needs to be legally binding?
I think that the kind of flip-flop that we've had where, and this is a symptom of our broken politics, where you have one government put in a certain type of legislation, and then the next government, I mean, it doesn't matter who's Liberal and Conservative comes in, and they say, we're going to get rid of all that. And then the next government in waiting is already saying, well, if we get in, we're going to get rid of all that. I mean, that kind of destructive cycle doesn't get anywhere. So what the Greens are saying is that we need to fix the broken politics. We need to learn to work together. So what Elizabeth May has proposed, not saying that independent accountability isn't a good idea, but we need to get the parties to work together. And I think that if the Liberals and the Conservatives and the Greens and the NDP sit in an inner cabinet and make an agreement, okay, we're going to use these tools to move in the direction that we all agree we need to move, then we can hopefully have some kind of a Canadian compact that we can see the duration of. Because we don't need an action plan that will last us for 4 years and then it'll be batted aside. So, and that can happen with legislation.
I take your point. I guess in the absence of the feasibility of that cooperation, though, I wonder, given that there are so many Canadians who have now dealt with two governments who didn't yet, or aren't, one who isn't on track to meet the targets they set out and one who just didn't make those targets at all. You know, there is a level of skepticism out there, and I'm wondering how you combat that. I take your point on the idea of working together, but not all the parties are aligned, to be frank, on the type of measures that are needed to fight climate change. So in the absence of that, how will, should it be enshrined? Should there be some mechanism of accountability that goes beyond what exists right now?
Well, I'm an economist. I'm not a lawyer. But it seems to me that the durable legal foundation is the Constitution. And if one government puts forward legislation that's binding, the next government can come along and start saying we're going to change the legislation. So I think that working together, is a better remedy to the political problem that we have.
How do you envision working together? I mean, look at the campaign we're witnessing right now. Your targets are at 60%, the NDP's at 38%, the Liberals are at 30%, maybe stronger, and the Conservatives are just saying, we'll give you a good shot of heading to 30%. Like, what is the common ground, do you think?
I think the common ground has to be with the Paris targets. And that's what the people on the global climate strike are saying, that we need to drive to a future where we are not destabilizing the planetary climate. The science and the evidence is telling us that we need to keep the global average temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius. So the Green Party perspective on this is that this is not some kind of political game, and it's not about making political announcements with a green piece of paper in front of you, or like paddling in a canoe and making your announcement. This is about science and a target that the scientists have told us we have to aim towards.
But
so
again,
in
even
terms
that
of
target,
the
the Green Party is saying be more aggressive. Even that target isn't common ground, because your party is saying we have to be twice as aggressive as what we set out in Paris.
Well, the thing is that the Harper targets, which is essentially what the Trudeau government is using, which
exactly
is the 30% reduction, that will not get us to the 1.5 temperature mark, right? So where the Green Party is coming from is looking at the scientific report, the 1.5 degrees, and then saying, what do we need to do to get there? And that's how we arrive at the 60% reduction, which is twice as much as the other parties are saying. Sorry, the NDP, I think, is at 38,
yeah.
Right? So and I think that the foundation of the Green position is coming with the scientific and the International Panel on Climate Change report.
Your party also released a fairly detailed costing of many of the promises that you've made, including much of the climate portion of your policy. I looked through it, and there was one thing that stuck out to me. Your party is promising to make sure that all vehicles are electric by 2030, but there is no accounting for it in there. How much money is the Green Party willing to spend on that, given that only in 2018, only about 2.2% of all cars on the road in Canada were electric?
So I think that we have a lot of examples in Europe in terms of sending what's called these electric vehicle mandates. And so that the car manufacturing companies who are selling cars in these other markets are definitely aware of these 10-year warning periods, so that we would expect that setting a 10-year time frame for such an achievement would then allow the car and manufacturing companies to be able to work with that. It's
so it
not,
wouldn't be subsidized at all by the government?
I think that we need to help consumers, but I think that if we have a 10-year transition, consumers understand that with various tools in play, like the carbon tax, like fuel standards, the cost of driving a car with an internal combustion engine will be more and more expensive over time. That is also in the consumer's interest to be switching to an electric
But electric
vehicle.
cars are so expensive right now. The cheapest one, I have a list here of all the cars being sold in Canada, and the cheapest one is about $32,000. So, like, how, you know what I mean? This is not an affordable transition right now for Canadians to be making. So what kind of money would a Green Party-led government be willing to put forth to make sure that that promise is fulfilled?
I think that we have to look at it from the consumer perspective, so that from the consumer, it makes sense. The consumer has viable choices. Obviously, if you can buy one car for $5,000 and another one for $32,000, then we're addressing ourselves only to the kind of luxury segment, right? So I would expect that there would then be an incentive, as the Liberals are also offering right now, I think. I think it's 5,000.
Yeah,
and
it depends on what kind of car it is. I mean, it's still, that's $25,000 is still a lot of money for a lot of people, right?
So what?
And you're saying you're going from 2.2% to 100% in 10 years.
Right,
so, like,
but 10
that's
years.
Not cheap.
I mean, in 10 years, most households would be expecting to replace their car, right? So we're not saying drop your car now and that we're going to make the transition in 1 year, but we're saying that when your household is going to make that choice of replacing the car that you have right now because it's gotten old with the next one, that the incentive structure and the options and the paths for households are going to be such that it makes sense.
So that will involve some government subsidization as far as the incentives go, but you haven't determined to what degree.
Yeah, and again, I would like to come back to the point that deciding which tools to use out of the toolbox and how much of which tool, that is something that the Green Party would like to arrive at in concert with the other parties, so that it's something that we can then have national leadership and stick behind.
I understand the intention. I think, though, that for voters who are looking at your platform and trying to evaluate it on its own merits, they're entitled to know those details as well.
Okay, so on that, I mean, definitely we need to look at the transportation sector. It's an important part of our national emissions profile. It's, I think, over a quarter of Canadian emissions are from the transportation sector and growing.
Okay, I'll leave it there. I'm out of time. Thank you very much,
Okay.
Ms. Keller-Herzog. Appreciate it. That's Angela Keller-Herzog, the Green candidate in Ottawa Centre. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.